Eric,
Omar.
what happened prior to us hitting record just now? And why did it involve us objectifying Mike Tuchschere's biceps?
Well, for one, it's because they're close to 20 inches and looking good. And I was just struggling with the fact that he's allowed to be this strong and also have that big of arms at the same time, at the same height as me. So, if you can't beat him or join him, you just compliment him. So that's kind of what we started with, really.
So, Eric, first, you're a hunk, and let me reassert that, because don't you dare talk about your own physique, and I will derail this episode if you're not careful. But we have once again the Mike Tuchscherer on, who came up with the best existential analogy as it comes to one's lifting, navigation, their own journey. But we have the story. This is basically the companion piece to perhaps our previous episode, affectionately titled, The Death of Powerlifting. It's scintillating. It's sensational. And some people, my favorite, Eric, when someone said, what are the takeaways for this episode? Like someone asked, it's like this is a declarative statement. The death of powerlifting. We're not here to give you then, hey, it's all going to be good afterwards. But we began speaking with Mike Tuchscherer off the air about that episode. And we brought up, Eric, if you remember, inside that episode, because you competed, first meet, was it 2009? What year was it, Eric?
2006. You got vertically dyslexic with that number, yeah.
Shit. Okay, so that's 16 years ago. And that's why I am very curious, maybe everyone right now, because if you're on the YouTube, you should be on YouTube. Audio, it's completely fine. But to leave a comment, let us know when you started powerlifting, because we're going to get some real insights. We brought up something called RUM. Raw Unity Meat. And we're talking about the cultural cachet of powerlifting, taking everyone on the journey. Eric has a ton of experience. 2006 is when he started. So there's a lengthy period of observation. Well, we brought up this mythical event, RUM, Raw Unity. Mike Tuchscherer competed at that. Like, Mike is an OG of powerlifting. So I think before we start on the topic du jour we were going to talk about, which is Mike's own personal journey, it will perfectly complement that conversation on the death of powerlifting.
Yeah, man. So Raw Unity was like, I guess going back far enough, Raw wasn't a thing. Then it starts to be a thing. And there were some people around who were trying to make it more of a thing, and that's kind of where Raw Unity came in. I'm sure you guys probably talked about all that stuff before, but yeah, I competed in powerlifting on the equip side, was always interested in the raw side, and as that started to pick up steam, I went and did Raw Unity and a few other meets in Florida that were kind of similarly organized, and then the IPF decided, yeah, this is going to be an international thing, and so there we go.
Yeah, I think it's worth just putting the disclaimer out there that we're talking about like quote unquote OGs in powerlifting, but powerlifting has been around since the 60s, and I think most of the comments that we got in response to the death of powerlifting and most of the feedback were like, no, I see what you're talking about with kind of the understanding of this being a peak and a bit of an outlier rather than a trajectory for the future. I get that the death of powerlifting as a title maybe could make you think something different than that. But we play the game here, folks. All right. and just to totally throw my co-host under the bus, that was his title, just to put that out there. So, but no, I think... So, like, of course, powerlifting is not dead. It will not die. We're fine. You're fine. Everything's fine. You may be annoyed with the title. Sorry.
No.
But not really. I mean, it's fine. So, but I think we wanted to kind of kick that conversation off with a spark to get people to think differently about the arc of powerlifting. And I think some people do feel like something died if they got into the scene in that certain era where it was really blowing up and you have these exciting personalities and people are talking, I would say, idealistically about what powerlifting can be. And now we're kind of getting back to maybe reality. And I think for some people it did feel like the loss of something. So I see that as really what we were talking about. And it was actually really cool to, right before we started the recording, to start talking about Mike, about his take on that. So anyway, we thought, even though we really want to talk about Mike, and we will, it would be, I think, useful for you guys to hear someone who's been in the midst of powerlifting in a much more, I would say, I mean, first, like, why am I talking about powerlifting if we got Mike T on, is basically what I'm saying. So,
I mean, well, if your first meet was in 2006, mine was in 2003. So not a huge discrepancy there.
I'd say you compete at a slightly higher level, and maybe you have a few more athletes than me. I mean, World Games champ. So why don't you just let me give you the kudos that you deserve?
All right,
sir.
I will.
All right. So anyway, I would love to get what are your thoughts on kind of what we were trying to get at? That maybe we hopefully communicated well, but some people are maybe not feeling.
So I guess maybe to kind of catch up my own thought process here, as we started to talk about this before, I told you guys, like, my hot take on this was maybe that if this kind of contraction that we're probably going to see means that powerlifting culture also becomes more of what it was in the say pre-2015 type of time frame, then I wouldn't be too sad about that. Let me go a little bit more into detail on what I mean. Like, I definitely don't want to be one of these people who's like, I just can't stand what powerlifting is these days. Like, that's lame, like, it is what it is, and it's that way because we made it. But I do lately I've seen more of a shift in powerlifting to be less interested in the whole of the sport, just a little bit. And it's probably certain people, and it's probably people that are vocal in certain ways and things like that, but you have these problems in any sort of culture or subculture, right? But it's important to proactively try to shape it too. So, like, what powerlifting is to me culturally is, the sport where everybody does still cheer for everyone else, and we all do actually take some part of personal satisfaction in seeing someone else hit PRs as well. It's intense competition, but when your competitor goes out there and they're pulling their third deadlift for the win, you still do actually cheer for them and genuinely want the best for them, even if you don't necessarily want them to beat you. Like, I don't want to make it sound too Pollyannish, but it's this complicated type of thing, but it was definitely not cutthroat. I mean, I wouldn't say the word that's anything resembling cutthroat at this point, but it's further down that trajectory than it used to be, And I don't know. For me, for one, like, I like the more positive and more supportive kind of community types of powerlifting. The kind of powerlifting when you went to a gym and you saw another powerlifter, you were like instantly buddies because you both were committed to the sport, right? Like, it didn't used to be a thing to find good powerlifting gear available at just any city that you go to, pretty much. So there are aspects of the present that are definitely worth keeping, and then there's aspects that we should aim to preserve as well.
I love it, and I think that's very helpful. And I think we maybe focused primarily on what had changed and why it was temporary. And I think what you're focusing on, Mike, is what has stayed, but maybe became a less dominant proportion of the awareness of the culture and how it was perceived. That will also de-intensify with this contraction, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, as then it gives a little more weight to the ways or the aspects that I also totally agree with you and share that I think were positive. And it's always, I've always seen those things very apparently because I've been involved in two communities, the bodybuilding community and the powerlifting community. And honestly, even within the bodybuilding community, there's a very different feel in different federations. And I don't know if it just comes down to size or that in the untested feds, people are a little more willing to, I mean, when I say size, I don't mean like how big your delts are. I mean, the size of the organization. Like natural bodybuilding as a whole is probably big as untested bodybuilding, maybe even a little bigger, depending on how you define it. But the organizational unity in untested bodybuilding is much more unified. So when you go to some of those shows, you get 23 competitors in one division, and you go to the equivalent show for a natural show, like a regional qualifier, and you get 6. So anyway, I definitely noticed a different feeling when I had done, say, an NPC show versus an INBA or WBF show or what have you. And, that is another level when then you go to do the local powerlifting meet compared to that. So, and there's something I really appreciated, and that it instantly made me fall in love with the powerlifting community. And I think if I was to try to erase my memory from 06 to 2012, maybe in 13 or 14, you just pop me into like the Instagram scene on 2015, 2016, 2017, it wouldn't feel that different from bodybuilding, which I could say this because I'm a bodybuilder. Not really a great thing, like, don't get me wrong. There are really awesome voices in the bodybuilding community. But as an example, sometimes with 3D Muscle Journey, we feel like, and we've gotten this feedback from others, so it's not just our own kind of, martyrdom of ourselves to put it in this positive saving the community kind of way, but we've been described as like an alternative way of seeing bodybuilding. Like, oh, this is a positive community, like, oh, you can do this with a more like egalitarian approach that is, focused on the journey rather than just this do everything to get to an outcome. And I think that's an important, that voice needs to be there. It doesn't have to be the dominant voice, but I want people to have that option, that way of seeing it. So that if their relationship changes, and here's the segue, and you guys will appreciate this, if your relationship changes with the sport, or the sport changes and it still has those multifaceted aspects, you can continue or find a way forward. And that is the real reason we wanted to bring you on today, Mike T, is that I think your last meet was 2016 before this most recent one?
Yes, sir.
So you have taken 6 years off, which is the entire length of time that we were talking about of this crazy peak. That is, some of these really dominant, loud voices, that's the entire time they've been in powerlifting in some cases. And they've, confidently stated on Instagram they dedicated their lives to it. And now 5 years later, they're a painter and they don't lift weights. Or more often, they're like a venture capitalist who's not actually venturing into much capital. But it'd be great if they're a painter, probably. But so you were, I guess the way I would describe it, and I'd love to hear if you would echo this, you kind of had to cut what felt like at the time maybe your competitive career short or stop, not necessarily on your own terms, because you were in pain and you couldn't perform the way you wanted. And it was shitty to see, man. Like, I have always been a fan of you, not as a thinker, but also as an athlete. And it's one of those things where the athlete has a great mindset. They are both competitive, but they're also supportive, and they host a community. And so I guess I'm just your fanboy for a lot of reasons. But it was very difficult for me, and I imagine maybe worse for you. Probably not as bad as it was for me to experience that. And now you've come back, and I know that there has been a shift in your mindset. So anyway, let's start with tell us about your competitive career leading up to that point, before it was your 6-year hiatus.
Yeah. So that story actually starts back in like the 2014 timeframe. So at that timeframe, I was going to the Raw World Championships pretty much every year. So the first one was in 2012. I went to that one, 13 and then 14. 2012, I had some issues getting squats passed, so didn't do as well as I'd hoped. 13, I dropped 2 deadlifts, and I was hopeful to win, but didn't because I dropped 2 deadlifts. And so 14, I'm thinking, this is the year. This is also the year that I knew my main competition is going to be Mohamed Bouafia of Algeria, and that he was very strong. And it's kind of there's a whole bunch of, lessons learned from my perspective here. But, keep in mind, at this point, I'd been competing for 11 years, and I'd been training for, longer than that. And I'm, the guy that's known for bringing RPE to powerlifting and super focused on auto regulation and individualization. If there's anybody that should have known better, it should have been me, right? But I'm watching my competition do crazy stuff in the gym, and I'm going, how am I going to beat this guy? Well, I've got to do more work. Got to do more, and I get sucked into this trap of, I've got to outwork the competition, and man, you take somebody like me who thinks about training constantly, who is just obsessed with this. I enjoy it, all the aspects of it, and it had been that way for years. And I had worked myself during this prep to the point where, like, I'm literally watching like motivational videos on YouTube just to drag myself down to the gym and do another training session. I was just pushing things too hard, man. I went to a picnic with some buddies at that time frame, and I go sit down, and I'm sitting down like an old man, and my friend's like, "What's the matter with you?" I'm like, "Don't worry about it. I'm just training for this competition, And he's like, "Dude, maybe you ought to take it easy a little bit." I'm like, "You don't understand. I've got to do more work than these guys, And anyway, I started getting this hip pain whenever I would lock out a squat or a deadlift. And of course, ignore it because you're getting ready for the worlds, man. You got to push, and it just kind of doesn't go away. And I managed to go to that meet, and I did well, represent myself well and everything. And I think, okay, now I can deal with this hip pain. Oh, wait, Raw Nationals is in like 3 or 4 weeks, so got to do that one too. But you do get to a point where you go, okay, well, now I can deal with this, And so I tried to take some time off. Well, it doesn't go away. Start working with a physical therapist. Well, that doesn't work. You work with a different physical therapist. Well, that doesn't work. Try this, try that. Do research, try again. Anyway, I'm dealing with this hip pain, and this goes on for like 2 years, and it gets worse and worse. And I would do competitions. I wasn't able to train how I wanted to because you're always working around it or taking time off or trying to come back. And anyway, it's like 2 years of like regressive performances. And that last competition was the national championships in 2016, right? So this is the first year that they have the primetime event at Raw Nationals, and they called to invite me to, hey, are you interested in doing this? And I accepted, and then had like a terrible training session, and we're however many weeks out from it. And I called him back and I was like, look, man, there's no way I'm going to be in good shape for this. Like, you give my spot to someone else, somebody else is going to need it. I'm not going to represent for this. And he's like, well, we can't, because we've got things in the works. We can't go back on these things now.
But no pressure.
Kind of irreversible. So I'm like, well, shit. So I go to this primetime event, the first one, and represent myself terribly, because I'm lifting way under what I ought to be, what my best lifts were, but I'm just thinking, I committed to it. I'm going to do this meet. And it was not a great mark to set. So I come away from that competition and I think, you know what, I'm not signing up for anything else until I can get this taken care of. And oh, by the way, I'm tired of training in pain, so I'm just not going to do anything that hurts. And so I didn't. So I stopped squatting and deadlifting, and I knew I wanted to train, right? Because I just love this stuff. So I'm going to find other things that I can do. And for me, I found out that I could front squat as heavy as I want. It was fine. And I picked a few other exercises that I was going to focus on. And man, my love for training just came right back. It's like, hey, this is actually really fun to do when it doesn't hurt, So I started focusing on that and treating it like it was important to me, and it became important to me. I started getting front squat goals, and I would joke with you guys that, these are things that are important to me. No one else in the world cares about it, but I care, so I'm gonna push for it. And I tried to kind of reintroduce into squatting and deadlifting a few times, unsuccessfully, but it was more logistics than anything else. But it ends up being 6 years before I get back to the platform. it didn't have to be that long. And I've coached other people in kind of similar situations, and it hasn't been that long. I would do things differently now, but part of it was just kind of the mental break needed, and then part of it was just kind of finding my way to get the training done to feel comfortable stepping back on.
I love it. And I think that's a great overview. And I want to do two things. I want to provide a little more context to where you were and the mentality and what preceded it. And then I also want to talk about kind of the, because I know your mentality has shifted even more, because from that era where you found the love of the game again, if you will, by finding some substantive movements. And I'm sure that made you think, well, like what is my motivation then? Like, if I can just do this thing that's non-competitive, is it really powerlifting, or is it something deeper? So we'll get into those. But if you could tell, let's go back even further before the first classic worlds and the world championships in IPF. You had been competing for a while and you'd reached some pretty high heights. Can you give us a little bit of a rundown of your earlier competitive history? Just because I know not everyone in the cult, and by the way, if this is you, shame on you, has memorized Mike T's competitive history and knows where you've been as an athlete.
I started competing officially in 2003. I did, USA Powerlifting, collegiate nationals and junior nationals while I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy. Went to the Arnold. The first year that USAPL was invited to the Arnold was 2008, and I was there for that. Went to the World Championships in 2008. 2010, 11 timeframe, I was competing mostly at like the Raw Unity meets and things of that nature. In 2012, the IPF starts hosting the Classic World Cup, which, I mean, we all knew what that was, right? That's the first Raw World Championship. And so, of course, I wanted in on that. And that's kind of where I've been focused in the time since.
Yeah, and love the humility. I went to, I'm glad you said that you at least won World Games instead of just went there. I like that. It's a pretty prestigious title. I mean, World Games, folks, it's not World Championships. This is on a 4-year cycle. Got to get selected. It is literally the elite of the elite. So just anyway, just wanted to put some, and it's not just me saying, wow, isn't Mike T amazing? I think the point is that there is a certain mentality, and I haven't experienced this personally, but definitely working with athletes, that everyone shares to some degree, although it is expressed, very differently among others. And there's a certain pressure and knowledge of expectation when you are, whether you really want it or not, when you compete at a high level, you're in the spotlight. People are aware of you. Others think about you. It's not only the pressure of, hey, last time I totaled X amount of weight and this time I want to improve it. Everyone knew I totaled X amount of weight. I represented my country. I got this medal. I'm getting points for so there's a lot more that starts to go into it, and it's more to manage at the very least, regardless of how well you manage it. And we do see some people who do a great job with it, and others who kind of crumble under this, unfortunately, either on the platform or off. So I think that can give a little bit of context to the listener to understand that you were a U.S. national team member and one of the most competitive lifters in your weight class in the world, and certainly in the U.S. You won multiple Raw national titles. So there is a certain level of pressure that goes into that to then have this kind of, backsliding and feeling like, oh, I'm going to be on prime time for the first time and not perform well. So for the watcher, I just wanted to put that out there. And of course, any commentary you have on that would be great. I mean, if you're comfortable, I can just tell your story because
No, you're spot on, man. But I remember very vividly doing this interview in like the 2013-14 timeframe. So like I would say that's kind of some of the most competitive that I've been, and the interviewer was asking me, what did I hope to accomplish at this meet? And it was the World Championship. And I'm like, well, I want to win. Of course I want to win. Like, why else are you here? Like, that win, it was all about winning, and I mean, contrast that. It's funny because like that same competition didn't win, but I performed well. I lifted well. And I remember kind of having this this kind of weird feeling after the meet, and talking to Susie Hartwig Gary, who has been in the sport. Like, you want to talk about OGs in the sport, and she's amazing, and 25-time, I think, national champion at this point. So just really, really amazing lifter, and I'm glad to call her a friend. And she was there helping to handle me and a bunch of other people as well. And I remember talking to her afterwards and saying, like, man, this kind of feels weird. Like, I didn't win, and I'm disappointed about that. But I lifted really well, so I kind of feel like I should feel good about that. And I remember her telling me, like, look, you don't have any control over whether you win or not. Like, that's not even that good of a goal. You want to go and lift your weights, do as well as you can do. And if you do that, that's all you can do. And I remember that was a pretty big turning point for me. And I mean, I think that moment, and just the knowledge that I've carried with me throughout my career, that, look, this will someday end. You know, that both of those things really helped me to cope with it when it was time to not compete. It also absolutely did not hurt that I was able to continue coaching. So it's not like I had to give up my friend groups and things like that. So I still maintained a lot of the social connection that comes with it, which was very, very helpful. But I think just kind of the knowledge that, hey man, someday you're going to hit your last PR. Someday you're going to lift for the last time. That's just life. You know, this might be your last PR, but it might not be too. You know,
Yep.
And to focus on lifting your weights and not put so much stock into what other people are doing.
Yeah, and Omar, I don't know if I ever told you this, but back in, I think, the late 2012, maybe it was late 2013, and it must have been late 2013, but I was figuring out what I wanted to do my PhD thesis on. And I reached out and had a long conversation, very generously, that Mike gave me his time. And we had only, briefly met when I went to one of his seminars in Australia and chatted a few times online. So, we had a pretty long phone conversation, and, I'm expecting to just, like, thank you for your time. Let me ask you these questions, and I'll try to. But Mike starts asking me questions about 3DMJ and about kind of the viability, how we do it as a team. And the motivating factor behind it, if I recall correctly, Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, was you were very aware of the precariousness, if you will, and the finite nature of an athletic career. And you were like, I really want RTS to be a thing, not Mike T being the driver of this coaching. And I want the intellectual content and the coaching quality to stand on its own and not be reliant on me, being a world champion, or at least a good lifter, because that has a shelf life. And I think that speaks to the awareness, but it also speaks to potentially some of the reasons behind why other people kind of have phased out of powerlifting, is that they have all their eggs in one basket. And if things don't go well as a powerlifter, it's a threat to their identity. And like you said, it's a threat to their social group. And they don't feel like they necessarily have a home because they identify so much as just one singular aspect of the community. And others, though, like, for example, they retire, they become a ref, they get involved with the committees, they still coach, they are involved in podcasts or just talking about it. Like, they stay in the community. Like, for example, I'm thinking of, like, actually, like 50% facts, like Jim and Silent Mike. Like, you don't think like, oh, Silent Mike deadlifted 700 pounds. Like, that is everything about, like, who he is and what he's about. But many lifters do that to themselves. But instead, like, people, like if Mike and Jim are going to have a conversation about powerlifting, you listen because they're part of the community, and I think that is a really important thing. And it was good to hear you specifically state that. And I think kind of as a tag along to our last conversation in our last episode, Omar, is that it's not just getting caught up in the boom, but it's sometimes because the boom had an aspect to it of, oh, as an athlete, there's a viable path forward. This is like, Major League Baseball, whatever. There's no need to really integrate yourself into the community. It's more like, what can I extract from it as a star? of my lifting. And I think, if all of a sudden there's no more stars, outside of its own niche community, then that kind of just loses its fuel. So I think it is really important for people to think about themselves as a member of a community rather than the focus of a community because they're doing well. So just to put that out there.
So spot on. Like that would be the thing that I think is very important about, like if you're going to take away a nugget of like what is important about powerlifting culture, I think it's that you're a member of a community that you give back to, you don't just extract from. And I mean, part of that is in the volunteer nature of how competitions are run. And I mean, look, I would like for I'm definitely in favor of people getting paid for their work. So if we're going to have refs and things like that, to the extent that we can fairly compensate them for their labor, we should, absolutely. But the thing was built on and was necessarily built on volunteer. It's important too. And, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to sew back into a community. So it just find a way,
Mm. Yeah. So let's get back into, all right, it is 2016 and you decided you need to step away from the platform. You reinvigorate your training by just simply moving the bar off your back and putting it on your clavicles. What revelations comes from that? Well, I mean, but a small difference biomechanically, but from the conversations we've had, a pretty big difference as far as your understanding of yourself and what drives you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I went from thinking, well, why am I doing this? Well, I want to win better, and that part had always been there, of course, but I grew more conscious of it and I would say took more center stage, and this is something that kind of evolved and changed over time too, because it's not that other part of me that wanted to win. It's not that wasn't true or in some way was incomplete. It can be true for a while, but it doesn't have to be the only thing. It doesn't have to be true for all time. So yeah, I definitely started to focus more on, trying to figure out the puzzle and thinking more about, solving the problem of training more than, the competitive aspect of things.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know about you, but it seems like almost there's like two steps removed. Like there's one is I'm not currently competing, but I'm still doing the big three and I'm training for a meet. Mm-hmm. And then for a truly competitive powerlifter, stepping away and saying, look, I don't deadlift and I actually don't back squat. Were there mental gymnastics in feeling like, am I still valid? Is this still relevant? Is there still a point to this?
Not for me so much. I did intend to come back. I did always intend to. That was always my angle, is to step back on the platform. I remember back when Facebook was the thing, saying something on Facebook about, like, I don't know if I said like we powerlifters or something like that, but I included myself among powerlifters, and somebody said something like, "Hey man, are you still in this even?" And I remember thinking like, "And of course, yeah." Like I'm not training for a meet right now, but yeah, that's still how I saw myself. I mean, I knew that the issue that I was dealing with at the time, so like 2016, I'm 31. Well, yeah, you got this hip pain. Maybe it goes away, maybe it doesn't, but hey, 10 years is a long time. Lots of things can change in that time frame. So the odds of something good happening here, yeah, something good can happen here. So I was always optimistic about that, I suppose.
Got it. Yeah. And this is something I've joked with Mike Zerdos about before, and I think probably both of you, but the person who's competed at a regional level and they have a change in job or whatever, or they have a kid and they get onto Facebook, this is around this time that I'm also thinking of it, and they announce their retirement from powerlifting. Like they're a NBA, starter who is announcing that they got traded or that they're taking some time off or something like that, and they have to hold a press conference about it. When all that's really happening is they're probably going to keep training. they have, like you said, there's a decent probability that their life will change again and they can compete, but they have now announced something. And I think that it speaks to some of the things we do with our identity when we get wrapped up in the sport that are, well, I'm not going to say they're debilitative, but I would say they're not just facilitative. I do think identifying as a powerlifter will take your training to another level. It will help you integrate into a community. It helps you maintain a level of constant motivation to train a level where others people just don't really get it, you know? But there are also potential, downsides. And there's a lot of research on quote unquote athletic identity that it's absolutely associated with high performers, and it's a common trait in athletes for sure. But when you can't execute the aspect of being an athlete, it threatens your identity because you identify as an athlete, and that has consequences. So I think it's just an indication, seeing that, where as an outsider, I think it's pretty obvious to be like, was that necessary? No one cares that you're not going to do like the regional North Carolina meet next year. Like, I'm sure your family does, and you care. It's not that it's not important. And as Eric, that's the highest level I've competed equivalent in my area. So it's like, I get it, and it's very important to me when I compete in those meets. But when I took some time off from 2016 until the next meet I did in 2020, I didn't need to make a 5-year retirement post, And it's not to say like, oh, I'm smarter, I'm different, I get it. But I think it highlights some of the potential issues with the way people relate to their sport.
Yeah. And I had a number of benefits, I think, helping me. And I mean, in no small measure, it was just the acknowledgement that it will end. Someday you will hit your last PR. Someday you go to the gym for your last time. That those are just realities to contend with, and you likely won't know in advance when those things are. So that's just that knowledge is helpful, but also, again, like I mentioned, being a coach, being able to maintain my social circles, and still like switching from back squats to front squats. It's enough that I didn't have to give up like the whole of my athletic identity. There is like this period of time in there that was a little bit tough, while I'm kind of reacclimating and kind of figuring things out. But, it's much different to figure things out for a couple weeks or a couple months versus, hey, this is, no longer a part of your life in any way.
Totally.
Eric, I'm hearing here.
Sir, what are you hearing?
The Mike Tuchscherer is the worst capitalist I've ever seen in my life, where he said that how it could sometimes poison certain things. I was thinking when you first mentioned this about powerlifting regressing back to its original form, it could be a question of scale, as we tend to grow something, and there are those incentives. I did think when, Eric, you joked about making that retirement post, or Mike, where we've witnessed other people, not only is it maybe a little self-absorbed, but it seems to me it's a compensatory mechanism. Because to your point, you see yourself a certain way. Like, it reminds me, like there are certain, I sometimes ride with Uber, I ride the TTC, and there are some Uber drivers that, of course, I'm just doing this part-time. Like, they start this conversation because it makes them uncomfortable. Or like, sometimes I've been a waiter before, where a waiter will say, well, I'm an actor. Like, you get a talking, and their identity is not tethered to their current state, because they recognize in their head there's a disconnect between where they see themselves and what they're currently doing. So that kind of, once again, declarative, I'm retiring from powerlifting, is like, don't judge me too harshly or what have you. And that's fine. But I think why we are part of the cult, and truly, I have felt this for a while, that if Eric and myself were ruling atop the pyramid, Mike Tuchscherer is John the Baptist. Like, he's the original. There's a lot of things when we talk about sipping the Kool-Aid, like, Mike invented the formula for it. And I do want to
Mike's got a Kool-Aid factory.
Bro, yeah, we basically buy from Mike, and then we shell it out to the other people. But I do want to cycle back, because there's a lot of things just to touch on to get back to your 2022 meet, Mike. And that is, I first found you probably 2011. It was like a super training video, man. Before the auto regulation, I was actually looking up something regarding, like, I had some back pain and so on and so forth. And that's how I stumbled upon you. But a lot of the things that we discuss on Iron Culture, you're the perfect avatar for, because Eric jokes. Eric's a hunk. He's a competitor. I am an amateur lifter that enjoys the process of lifting. It's one thing to hear someone espouse this philosophy or these ideas when they don't compete or they don't compete at a high level. But when someone does the damn thing, wears it on their sleeve, is all about the community, has built their own successful training company, so on and so forth, and is talking some of these similar concepts and really thinks about it, I think it not only gives weight, but it also gives the missing context potentially. And I think what you said before about what powerlifting is missing a little bit, or your own journey, that comes from that introspection and self-awareness that sometimes could be missing within communities in general. But I think what is unusual, it is a rarefied category, and kudos to you, is a self-awareness that you're taking a step back. But when you talk about that tenuous stance of some people, they just had a child, right? So it's like, I'm retiring from powerlifting, that you had enough foresight that it was a pause, not a full stop, right? You didn't end the recording session. And I think that part of the mentality, like that part of the aspect, is refreshing, and it also is very interesting to see, because I would call, and I don't know if you agree, Eric, I would call that uncommon. I'd call that uncommon. And I'm just wondering, to cycle back to everything, it was a question that I had to ask you, man, is what made you come up with that conviction, or what were the surrounding circumstances where you knew 2016? Because I think some people, to give you respect once again, being at the highest level of competition, like we're talking, if you're the NBA here, you're going to the All-Star game. Like, we're not just talking, it's a regional meet, you do this on the weekend. So you're competing at the highest level. It means a lot to you. You're recognizing that, hey, these things are happening. It's not and I do resent the idea that some people, it's like, oh, just like, Mike, walk it off. Like, maybe it's in your head, bro. Like, that stuff, it's like, this is a man who dedicated basically like 2 years, 2.5 years of trying to figure this out, navigate it, compete, and have the foresight, like, this isn't forever. I will be back. What created that conviction within you? The assurance almost that this was indeed the fact, and not that it was like, maybe I'm just, this is like, I'm saying this is a pause, but like, it's a retirement, but I'm just like, I'm not one of those egoed out dudes where it's like, I'm retiring right now. It's like, you're leaving the door open. How did you develop that conviction? I think is something admirable that a lot of people, when we joke, when Eric and myself clown a little bit, I'm about this life, I got the tattoo of powerlifting on my chest, but 4 years out, they're selling, what do you say, Eric? Bro, that was brilliant. They're
venture capitalist or painter.
Yeah.
I gave them two options depending on their mind.
Thank you. So where does that, Mike, can you explain that? Because I think that is the central underpinning right there.
I mean, part of it's philosophical. Like, I've been a fan of Stoic thought for a lot of years, and I mean, that's pretty classic Stoicism, right? Just like, hey, the knowledge that this is gonna be over. So I mean, that was something that I thought about for a long time, and it was kind of fascinating to me in a lot of ways. Like, I remember reading Michael Jordan's biography specifically to hear about like the end of his career. Like, how did he navigate that? And so, I mean, it's been a fascinating topic for a long time, but I think a lot of the conviction probably comes from the fact that I'm on the other side of it now. So it's easier to speak about it with conviction.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I remember I've kind of, by competing again, I've kind of taken away one of I think one of my good stories that I would tell at seminars, because I would tell the story about like why autoregulation is important. And back in 2012, I did a competition in Florida. It was with Mike Zordos's competition in Central Florida, and it was just a minor thing. He just asked me to do it. I said, yeah, I'll do it. I didn't really like train up for it or anything. And I'm probably 2 weeks out from that competition at a normal training session, I popped something in my back, hurt my back. It wasn't a serious thing, but, minor back injury. You're like 2 weeks out, like, man, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to lift at this meet. We'll see what happens. I managed to heal up pretty quick. It was okay. I got like one training session in, a couple days before. I'm like, we'll see what happens. And I show up on the meet day, squats going about how you'd expect, bench goes about how you'd expect, deadlift, we'll see. I pull the opener, looks good. So we go to the planned second attempt, pull that one. Hey, that looked good too. And so we went to the planned third attempt. My PR at that time was 380 kilos. And the planned third attempt, just kind of based on things, I think was 377 and a half. So we put in 377 and a half, and we're just kind of standing there waiting, like you do, waiting for the third attempt to come around. And I was talking to my handler at the time, Arian Kamisi, who was just a young kid at the time back then. He goes, I said, it's like 2.5 kilos under my PR. Like, is that dumb? He's like, man, it's just this little local meet. If you want to go for it, go for it. I said, yeah, let's go for it. And you're not just going to tie your PR. So we go up another 5 kilos, and I go out there and I pull it, and I made it. Set a PR deadlift at 382 and a half. That's the most weight I've ever pulled in competition. And I mean, I guess technically even now, that's still the most weight I've ever pulled in competition. And who knows if I'll ever pull more than that. So I like to tell this story in terms of like autoregulation and the importance of taking it while it's there. That, I could have been like, well, we'll play it safe today. And then maybe I never get back to that level again, So, yeah, I think it's important to take it while it's there. That's not at all what you asked.
No, it is. It's an example of another level of kind of stoic thought that helped you navigate that situation in a positive way. Because I think people often frame stoicism as like meditating on death, like the 5 rings or whatever, like samurai, and not really realizing that it is also a way to to seize the day, if you will, if things are finite, and to appreciate them for what they are, with letting go a little bit of what they could be and what they have been, which I think is a key element of autoregulation. And I think it's interesting that you use stoicism to kind of be like, what, I might be able to come back on the platform. I'm not going to assume I can't, because I can't know that. Things have a chance of getting better. I used Bon Joviism when I was hurt, and I was just living on a prayer. Like, I was honestly just like, okay, what level of delusion do I need to think that my hip is going to get better? I'm going to get the surgery. It's going to go great. I'll come back and I'll be stronger. You put your faith in Bon Jovi and things work out. That's the moral of the story for Eric Helms. Because your 382.5 kilo deadlift was my 227.5 kilo squat out of competition due to COVID. And I look back and I'm like, Bon Jovi, they were right. Ooh. So.
Two intensely competitive philosophical, foundations that really just are the bedrock of Western civilization.
Stoicism and Bon Jovi. That's right. Yeah.
Now, I can say this, and that is, I feel, I learned it from Greg Nuckols, that cocaine CEO energy of optimism that should not be there, where that is an intro. Greg is actually a fantastic person. Let me put some respect on his name to lift with, because to your point, Mike, you don't know what's going to be there on that day. So we'll wait and see when I train with him a few sessions. And he's like, what's your best all-time PR on this? Like, it's like a behind the head overhead press. I'm like, I don't know, man. I think it's like 85 kg. He's like, it's looking easy. He's like, let's go up. He's like, let's see. It's like, I'll take you over under. He's like, I think you can do it out of nowhere, because the warm-ups are just looking good. And I've trained with Craig enough times where it escalates, but in a friendly, as Mike said, friendly, competitive way. Like, he genuinely wants me to hit a PR. And there's that duality. You could be, like, if you're competing, Mike, I assume, just to circle back to that for a second, you could be simultaneously excited for the other person. Like, these things can coexist. You could be happy they hit a PR. You could be happy that they won. And then you could be disappointed that you had a great performance and you still lost. Like, those two things can happen at the same time, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah.
You distracted me a little bit thinking about Greg, because I had a very similar experience with him.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've seen the cowboy belt squat thing that I set up that I have, but I brought it with me to an EPC conference one year. And Greg's great at this, because he just like will jump in. Yes. And do like the old school strongman thing of like, hey, this is the day's challenge. Let's get after it. Yeah. So we like maxed out on this stupid cowboy belt squat thing that I was doing. So that was fun.
I gotta say, some of the most fun training I've had was with you, Greg, LS, Bryce. Never before have I been in an environment where I was so far below the strength levels of everyone else and still just having a blast and also feeling like, this is all good. It was amazing. So yeah, a lot of fun. And Greg is hilarious in that way because can be very pessimistic and cynical about life in general. You know, like Schrodinger's cat, definitely dead. But when you get in the weight room, it's like, not only is that cat alive, but I'm pretty sure he benched 300 pounds, you know, like in that box. I don't know. I don't see it, but I'm guaranteed. Like, what's the cat's PR? 2.5 more than that. That's what he's hitting right now. We don't know if he didn't. I think he's got it, you know.
So, Eric, final grade, because I love this. And it's positive training, good times had by all, that he is such a gamer to train. That I remember I think he had maybe a little shoulder thing or something. He had a bench in a while. We were doing this project together, and it called Mike for 24 sets. We needed multiple angles. We wanted to give a realistic portrayal of the session. We also had to compress the overall filming because we only had so much time in the gym we're allowed, so on and so forth. Anyways, it was a high volume workout. And I said, yeah, man, I said, Greg, I'll do, don't worry about it, dude. Seriously, you just squatted, we did a lot of stuff. I said, let me just do it. He's like, no. He's like, I'll do it with you. And he joked. He had not done more than 5 working sets for the last several years. We had to do something like 24 on the bench. And he said the next day, he's like, I think he was joking. He said, I think I legitimately got rhabdo. Or he just said, the soreness lasted, well over a week, and he was just joking about it. But he is that guy, and you do want to surround yourself with individuals, I would say, like that when you talk about the environment. I know this is a complete tangent, or simultaneously, it's competitive and encouraging. And I think that is my preferred environment, where you want to perform at your best, but it's not when you could peak. You've seen on Instagram, and I think that's the modern context. I remember this kid, he was lifting at the gym, and he was training with a friend, but as the friend was about to PR, there's venom in his eyes. There's vitriol that I saw where he's like, you got this, but the way he said it, Eric, wasn't you got this. It was yeah, I'm your friend, so you should get this
out.
Yeah, 100%. And then the other guy, I think this encapsulates some of the modern problems of it being so asymmetric, the rewards and how people identify, is that when he hit a squat PR, it was 225. And I'm not trying to demean the person, kid, you're legitimately 16 or 17, you're just getting started. He said to the camera, you get that? So you did it? He yelled. And the very next thing Mike was you recorded, you got it? And that was it. And that's the same guy that was when his friend hit the deadlift PR, he's like, you got this! And his eyes, pure venom.
And that's at a young age too, still in the newbie phase and is already plotting on everybody. Everything's a zero-sum game. Random PR in the gym in a novice phase. If you put those plates on your bar, they're coming off mine. We can't have that.
No, I do think to go around, man.
Yeah.
That person needs to not be in sport. I'm sorry.
I think it is tethered to, so I think the thing I'm hinting at, maybe we've hinted, I think it's kind of tethered. There's different places people are motivated by different things, but it's kind of tethered to longevity. The question that we're talking about is one of longevity. Yes. And if that is your sole focus or your sole motivational factor, there is a half-life to that. There's a shelf life.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to play out pretty quickly. It doesn't take too many years, and gains get hard to come by, and you've got to have something to sustain you, I think.
Yeah.
And speaking of longevity, so we got a good read on kind of where you were at and the philosophy that underpinned your ability to stay connected to the community and also the circumstances which you created on your own. And see the future for yourself on the platform, even though you were only doing one of the 3 competitive lifts for the vast majority of your training. At what point did you start to see that positive, but still realistic, optimistic hope of, I'm going to compete and I plan to turn into, oh shit, I can get back on the platform? What did that conversion look like, where that started to become not just, I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but, oh, that's definitely a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's the lights behind that platform?
Yeah, it definitely took a while. I took probably a couple years before I didn't. Let's try that again. I took probably a couple years before I started trying to reintroduce the competitive powerlifts. It didn't need to take that long. I think in hindsight, I was probably pretty burned out from dealing with pain issues and stuff like that. And like I said, I was just having fun lifting and improving and not worrying about, does this hurt or not? And I'm glad that I took that time. When I started trying to reintroduce the competitive power lifts, I had a number of false starts. Fortunately, they were not due to pain. They were all logistics, really. But I think that's an important lesson. So I'd gone through this period of like a couple years not really training competitive powerlifts. So you don't just jump right back into things. It needs to be this gradual process. And for me, I don't know if the injury is still there or anything. I haven't poked the bear in a couple years, So let's start slow and reintroduce slowly. So what I did, the plan was to start at like 30% of 1RM and add like 2.5 kilos a week, and you do the math on that and you're like, man, this comeback's going to take like a year or two, but hey, it's going to take however long it takes. And I would start on that process. And then whenever life would get busy, I'm pressed for time, got to get this training session in quick. That would be the first thing that would get dropped out because it didn't feel like training. It's so light, it's so easy. It was, like you're thinking like 30% for 3 sets of 5 or something like that. And that would be the first thing that go, oh, I'll get it later this week. And then you don't. And then it's been a month and you go, well, crap, I guess I better start over. So the key for me was finding a way logistically to include it into my training so that I wouldn't skip it. So my thing was I would include it as part of a warm-up. And I wouldn't do 3 sets of 5 as per the standard recommendation. I did 1 set of 10, and I thought I can do that as part of my warm-up, and it is like not intrusive, and I can just make sure that I always get it done. And I would, back squat my 1 set of 10 on my front squat warm-ups. I would deadlift as I was warming up for rows or something. And I just kept that going until it got hard. And then, that 1 set of 10 is actually kind of difficult. And now it feels enough like training that I could mentally justify committing the time to it. So then it has its own training slot. And I just kept pursuing that, and I got up to where on the squat, at least, well, the deadlift too, but I mean, I never deadlifted high reps before, but for the squat, definitely I got an all-time PR set of 10. I thought, well, that's pretty cool,
What did you hit?
615 pounds, maybe 600, 615, somewhere in there, for a set of 10, which was pretty fun. I mean, not at the time. It was fun afterwards. Fun after I caught my powerlifter breath. But yeah, so when that got hard enough, I said, okay, from a set of 10, we dropped to a set of 8 and kept progressing load, and then 2 sets of 5, and then a couple sets of 3. And I mean, by the time you're doing a couple fairly difficult sets of 3, that's real training. The temptation at that point becomes, okay, now you're, quote, better, right? Just pick back up a powerlifting program. No. You take the next step. It's not about getting back. You can't ever go back. At this point, I'm 5 years older. You can't go back to the person you were before. You do the next thing that you need to do. So for me, it was I continued to progress and get stronger on really doing pretty minimal amounts of work. I was squatting once a week. I was deadlifting once a week for like a couple sets. I mean, I was doing other lower body training, but it was the same lower body training I had been doing all this time, right? So it was just that little bit of competition work. And I suppose around this time would have been like late last year, a friend of mine, Brian Miner, sent me a message and he goes, hey man, I just signed up for this competition in like 6 months. And I said, yeah, I think it's about time. So I signed up for it as well, thinking like 6 months, that's plenty of time. Surely I'll be plenty ready by then. But 6 months goes fast, and before you know it, you're actually getting ready. So,
well, we'll get into the recounting of the competition and how it went. But You said something there, you can't ever go back, which is just a physics statement as to our best understanding of how we think time works and causality. Which, hey, this isn't a podcast. We don't have Einstein as a guest. If we're wrong, we're wrong. But if we are wrong, we'll go back and correct it. So I think what I loved about that statement is that it shows if people are paying attention. If you think about the training systems that you use at RTS, like emerging strategies and auto-regulation, it has philosophical underpinning rather than it just being a system. It is so tempting, and it is not completely illogical to use where you previously were to inform where you're going. But you also have to do that while understanding the limitations that who you were is not who you are. It is maybe the closest proxy if it was, say, last week. But 5 years ago, pre-injury, you having 10 more kids, is just, I'm assuming, is a lowball figure. It's a different life. It's a different person. It's a different mentality. It's a different body. And you've also been training differently from those 5 preceding years versus the years prior to it. And being able to auto-regulate and adapt with what is currently happening and what's in front of you and what is most recent looks very different than taking those same systems but having a philosophy that is almost seeing yourself as this static, like, oh, I'm a high volume guy, or oh, I am a low RPE gal, or oh, like, and those kind of declarative statements have an element of truth, but they also impose this layer of staticness that is just simply not the way biological systems work, and not the way that our brains work either. And I think this is a tangent, but I think it is a philosophically important thing that extends beyond training, that we change, that we are not necessarily the same person we were previously. And when we lock ourselves into that, we limit the possibilities of who we can be and where we can go. So I just wanted to point that out for those who weren't paying attention.
No, that's the piece to incorporate into your identity, I think.
Hey, Mike, there's so much here to unpack. Eric, phenomenal job. When you said, I enjoyed the training when you switched to the front squat, we could hear a beginner lifter, an intermediate lifter, and someone listening might write them off. Like enjoyment is a factor, sure, in your training, but it shouldn't be at the forefront. Like, you know how many times I've grinded out my training, so on and so forth. Can we define a little bit more? Because I think some people might just take that out of context and they would think it's ephemeral. It's like, it's a subjective state of you training that you personally derive enjoyment of, and therefore that leads to more motivation for you to train more, and that should be at the forefront of your overall, mindset. Can you get into that where you talked about shifting to things that, one, didn't cause actual pain in the session, so you didn't have a negative experience, but also just this idea of enjoying your like, what does that actually mean for you as also a high-level lifter? And I am not trying to dismiss anyone that isn't a high-level lifter, but I do think there's a different understanding of that versus like, a weekend warrior going out. Not that they don't have a directed aim, but just doing some pull-ups and push-ups and running a little bit and calling it a day. Like what is that for you, the enjoyment of training? What does that mean?
Man, so enjoyment in training is, I've said to people before, like, I don't consider training to be fun. It's not like if you said, hey, Mike, let's do something fun, I wouldn't pick like, oh, lifting weights. It would be, I don't know, playing video games or going somewhere neat or something like that, right? Like, so it's not like fun in that way, but there is some sort of satisfaction that you get from it. And there's the long-term satisfaction of progression, which is really, really cool. But I've been thinking about this more lately, like there's something else to it as well. And you don't, I promise I won't soapbox too much about training styles and, good versus bad and that, but I was talking to one of the other RTS coaches, John, recently, and we were talking about how, man, like when you approach a squat, a heavy squat, everybody feels anxious. Everybody does. You feel nervous. You feel maybe even afraid. But goddamn, I love that. Like I view that as something positive. That I feel that feeling, and then you go and you do it, and then the dissipation of that is so awesome. And like when I watch videos of Dave Tate, for example, who is finding a way to lift something heavy, you know, and it might be squat suit, reverse band, high box, spider, you know, and he makes fun of himself for all this stuff. But that's what I see in there. It's like, how can I approach something that scares me a good bit and then still do it anyway? And that is satisfying. And that's, I want my training to have that, you know, and it would be interesting if you could show me definitively, like, hey, actually your training would be better and more effective if that was just gone. I don't know that I could get behind that, you know, like that's a really important part of what makes it meaningful for me.
I'm going to take that soapbox, kick it out from under your feet, jump on it, apologize that I re-injured you after I focus on what I have to say, because I 100% agree. And what we're getting at here is that, you know, people think about quote unquote enjoyment in these very finite terms, and it's something much deeper than that. Like, I agree. If you want to actually have a fulfilled life that you feel satisfying, have a deeper connection to, chasing hedonism isn't it. It isn't just trying to spend the amount of time you have on this earth doing things that are pleasurable. That's great for passing time and it's pleasurable, but it doesn't give you a sense of satisfaction. We're talking about Viktor Frankl up in this bia. Like we're talking about finding meaning. And what you're talking about is pushing your limits and getting something in satisfaction that reminds you you're alive and that you can grow. And I think that's going to look different for everybody. Obviously, finding meaning is going to be highly individual. And you said, like, I'm not sure. I don't want to do training. Hence, like, struggling to do this 30% for 5, right? When it doesn't give me that. And it's not that everyone needs to, you know, be squatting a single at 8 RPE every session, you know, to get that feeling. But it needs to be connected to something deeper. So I think the person who's like, it's not about enjoyment, they don't realize that they are stuck in the middle of actually finding a lot of meaning. When you have this identity, like you were talking about, Omar, being a novice or early stage intermediate, and this future that is of this broad set of possibilities. Like, I remember back when I didn't really know what my genetic capabilities were, and I was like, you know, one day maybe I'll be Mr. Natural Olympia, you know? And I was just in the midst of all this possibility, and I was finding a ton of meaning in everything I did because I didn't know where it would lead. I was early in my career. It was very, very exciting, and everything I did in the gym gave me a sense of meaning. So when someone talked about, oh, I don't have that same enjoyment, I couldn't relate to it. And I might have had that same kind of criticism. But really, what I was getting at, or what I was critiquing, is I couldn't understand not being in the middle of it. I couldn't associate my own experience with the experience of a lifter 15 years in, who is needing to think a bit and assess things and make pivots and manipulate their training to maintain that sense of meaning. Because today, even I do get a lot of meaning out of my training. I love it, and I am definitely excited, even though I don't think I'm going to be Mr. Natural Olympia, but I'm taking it to where I can. And I've had to purposely restructure my perspective to get that same sense of being in the midst of finding meaning in my training. But that will, and ultimately needs to look a little different over time, which I think what we're getting at. So I think people who are critiquing enjoyment, they're not even really getting what the person's saying, and they're misattributing the terminology, honestly, most of the time.
Okay, Mike, Eric, come on. This is why Mike is bar none one of my favorite guests on the call. I said them before. Mike, they're not my children. I can play favorites here, okay? And I could elevate certain people. You're John the Baptist. You're the voice crying in the wilderness. When you spoke about that, basically overcoming adversity and that perspective, Eric, I think perspective is important if you haven't reached that point, because you are on that hedonic treadmill of newbie game. Like, everything feels great, it feels amazing. Like, you enjoy it because you have that visceral reaction. You're hitting PRs so constant that it's analogous to like social media, whereas you're growing as an influencer or whatever, it's just going like that. You don't know when it's going to end, and it feels like you're invincible, and that you're attached and tethered to that feeling. You hear like Mike talk about it, or Eric, or myself. It's like, that's not me. It sounds like you lost your passion. You're trying. It's like, no, this is a perspective that can only be gained by a certain length of experience, a level of maybe being introspective, self-aware as well. Because, Mike, what I love, the hint, and this is just Mike T 101, when he spoke to you, Eric, about 3DMJ, assessing the viability, and then maybe what he wanted to do to RTS, he had the foresight. He was at the top of his game. That's like, and this is no shade to like Taylor. Taylor Atwood has his career, he has his job, he has his family. But it's like if Taylor, at the height of his game right now, asked you, like reached out like, hey, Eric, can I ask you about your coaching? So like, imagine that foresight, because he's right now ostensibly at the top of his game. He doesn't need to be thinking of those things. They're still like maybe 5 years out, 10 years, or whatever. But he's already talking about that, and he's already understanding, okay, like, well, where do I derive my enjoyment and satisfaction? And just to throw my hat in the ring for what you, Jen, said, I would say the overcoming of adversity, the feeling of being terrified and being within your emotions, having that experience is something that's powerful, because it's a controlled environment to experience that. And I really do think, for me, lifting is that controlled environment to help you process certain things that will inevitably help you in other aspects of your life. And that's, myself and Eric, Mike, have spoken about this so many different times, where we learn these lessons in lifting that we're able to apply elsewhere. And I think that is something that's it's inevitable if you do it for a long enough period of time. And I'm thankful for that, because I feel that lifting essentially makes me more prepared. The outside world is incredibly volatile. It's very random. When things happen, the most catastrophic or positive things are usually at more random intervals. And this whole going through the training process, experiencing those emotions, feeling the highs and the lows and everything in between, is kind of life intertwined into everything. And it gives you a neat encapsulation of maybe what's to come outside of there in a safe environment. So hell yeah, man. I co-sign that all the way.
Awesome.
So take us to the precipice of enjoyment, the long-awaited climax.
Yep.
So Brian Miner hits you up. Let's do this, and you're like, yeah, I think it's time. What was the experience like of getting on the platform after having been away for six years, and now arguably being somewhat of a different person as you get back on it?
Very, very interesting, and I don't quite think I've like learned all the lessons that I need to learn from it yet. And I'll kind of talk about that a little bit, but I go into the competition like having really handled nothing heavier than an opener. And that was the heaviest weight that I lifted in, 5-6 years at that point. I have no idea what I'm capable of on a top end, using all available data. You just can't know, right? I know that I squatted X weight, and I deadlifted X weight, and I look at it and I go, it looks about like an opener. I guess that's what I'll open with, And that's probably a safe bet, but where do you go from there? Well, what I chose to do was, I said, well, an opener at that level usually means a top end at about, 10% higher than that. So I used that to help guide my attempt selection, but I really didn't know that, So when I went into the squat, I really had no expectations, or very little expectation. So I took my opener and went great. I took a 2.5 kilo conservative second attempt and went fine. And I think I took my planned third attempt. And that also went fine. So I went 3 for 3 in the squat and had a ball. It was so fun. And I was a little nervous. Everybody's nervous when they approach an opening squat. You should be a little nervous, And I had that, but it wasn't excessive. It wasn't anything that I had to calm myself down from or anything like that. And especially the second and third attempt were just fun. And I remember going, off the platform at that point, and just that was the main takeaway, was how enjoyable it was. So then we go on to the bench press. Now this is where I had the most expectations of myself, because I had trained bench press consistently. I'd been able to go heavy. I knew exactly, what I thought I was capable of, right? I had a good plan, and I took my opening attempt. It was a little bit heavier than I expected. So I was 2.5 kilos conservative on my second attempt. And that went about how a second attempt would go. And I put in my third attempt, which was, in hindsight, only 2.5 kilos off of the overall planned third attempt. which is the same as what the squat was. But my emotional reaction at that point was so different. You know, I was kind of standing there going, this is not going so well, you know, but it's fine. I've never, well, I shouldn't say never, but it's rare for a meet. You go to a competition and you're just, yes, everything is going perfectly to the best plans that we had laid out ahead of time. You're always adjusting and adapting, always. And it's almost always less than the perfect day, pie in the sky plans that you lay out in advance, you know. And I remember standing there waiting for my third attempt, and Natalie Hansen is handling Bryce, and she walks by, and I forget how the exchange starts, but I said something like, I said, I don't know, it feels a little heavy today. She's like, well, it's supposed to feel heavy. I'm like, yeah, it is supposed to feel heavy, right? Like, it's not training. It's not, you know, you're not supposed to just come out here and smoke every lift. It's supposed to be heavy at some point. And so that was a good attitude adjustment. So I made the third bench. That was good. Again, only 2.5 kilos off the plan, so nothing to be upset about, but it's interesting how the emotional reaction was different. And then I look at the subtotal, and again, I knew about what I could get to. You know, I knew what I was going to open with on the deadlift, and that means I can get to about 365 kilos on my third attempt. And I look at it and I go, well, if I pull 365, that'll be an 895 kilo total. Man, could we stretch it 5 more? Could we get to that 900? That'd be pretty cool, wouldn't it? And I start thinking about it, and you know, got the little devil and angel sitting on my shoulder. You know, on one hand, I'm going, that's not really why we came. You know, the first meet back. You know, keep it under control. You know, like, let's have a good experience here. And then the other part of me is going, it's only 5 more kilos. Just go for it, right? So I took my planned opening attempt. It's fine. I took my planned second attempt, which looks how a second attempt should look. So as I put in my planned third attempt at 365, and as I'm thinking about it, you know, I don't have this justification to reach, but I still want to reach anyway. You know, I still think, man, it's only 5 more kilos, you know. And Hanny was walking by, and I said, hey, man, I need some perspective. I need somebody outside of me right now. And so I showed him the video and ran the whole scenario by him. And he's like, well, which negative experience would you rather have? You know, would you rather pull 365 and go, I could have done 5 more, you know, or would you rather go for it and possibly miss? You know, and I said, yeah, I would rather, you know, given my goals for the meet and everything, I'd much rather pull it and think, yeah, it should have been, it would have been there if I'd only attempted it. So I guess that's the counterpoint to my earlier story about going for it. But in this case, I stuck with 365, totaled 895 kilos, and I look at that video and go, yeah, if I wanted to, it was there, but I had a damn good time.
Also, I wonder, Mike, about the context of the choice to not take the extra 5 then, and the choice to take the extra 5 back in the day with Arian is, you know, with Arian back then, you were at the height of your game. You'd had meets, you know, that same year, and you're going to have meets later that year as well. This time, a grinder third deadlift on your first meet back, even if you get it, there's a little bit of a negative to that. At least, I mean, you may not feel the same way, but I'd be like, oh shit, I'm back in my first meet, and I'm already at my top. Like, what is the possibilities moving forward? Like, am I ever going to get back to 380? But pulling a fast 365, going 9 for 9, and it makes you feel like this is just the beginning. Whether it is or not, but I feel like that is a facilitative mindset for the first time back, you know?
Well, and like I said, I don't think that I've like fully extracted everything that I want to extract from that experience. Like the fact that squats were the most enjoyable and had the least expectations, but I don't really think I underperformed. You know, I think I performed about as well as I was going to that day. You know, I mean, what's to be learned there? And are those types of expectations something that you can avoid, or is it something that is just part and parcel to competing and having a competition history?
Yep.
I don't know. And then do you go for it or not go for it? Well, I mean, that's part of what makes third attempt deadlifts so damn interesting.
Powerlifting.
Yeah. Is sometimes the right decisions to go for it, and then sometimes the right decisions not to. And it would be great if, well, I don't know. You might say it would be great if there was some sort of rule book that you could look at and get the answer right every time, but I don't know, that sounds boring.
Yeah, I don't think the show The Price is Always Right would have done as well, Not even with Bob Barker just killing it like he used to. If everyone just got on there and said the exact price every time, I wouldn't watch that, So
no, let me put that respect and say, Mike, you are an inspiration, man, because you're doing the damn thing long term. And because Eric and myself, we made the declaration, we're lifers to this. We love to see it. 6 years later, for the American friends here, damn near 2,000 pounds, I think, total. Like, come on. These are massive numbers, because usually when you hear an arc like that, and people, once again, I've heard, and I would say it is from a different mindset of something like, oh, you change your perspective, like now you're not as competitive, like, so, and they try and wrap it all together into this story. It's like, well, you're just not about this life or whatnot. It's like, man, imagine taking 6 years off, coming back, having a phenomenal powerlifting meet, enjoying your actual trade. So it's not one of those things, and I have seen this before, and to me, this is perhaps the saddest fate, is to have lost that passion or the meaning that's tethered to your performance. But because it's the only identity you know, and you're still trying to reclaim that or reassert it, you're in that perpetual cycle of just struggling. Like, who are you? You're trying to say, this is me, but it's not really happening. And you're in denial, and you think, like, if you just force it further, it's going to make it. That is perhaps, to me, the saddest fate of all. But this right here, I would say it's goals entirely. I've not been through anything training-wise remotely what you have, Mike. But I use examples like that as a direct inspiration into my overall training, and I could say that. So I just wanted to say thanks for sharing it overall, not only on Iron Culture, but I was watching on Instagram, and you just being one of the thought leaders in the community, helping to shape it. As you said, it's not just like, oh, auto-regulation, RP, like these are training concepts. It's like we talk about that philosophical underpinning for you that serves everything that moves forward. And I really do see that. So it's fantastic to see it all pan out and to have that meet happen and to leave the possibility that Eric said. I agree with Eric 100%. Like, you want to hit that third attempt, whew, you wonder, you leave the openness. I wonder what's next.
400?
Exactly. That's how I thought we have, like, Eric, because 400 is going to happen. It's like, it doesn't work that way. I'm like, does it? Does it though?
Can I lie to myself convincingly enough?
Yeah. No, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. It's I would rather be on that end of it, where, who knows what possibilities there are, but yeah.
Schrodinger's 400 kilo deadlift.
Nice.
And I to connect this back with kind of our early discussion in this podcast episode, I think because you do more than simply provide analytical, individualized training metrics and ideas, but you also have, I'd say, and this has increased throughout your career as I've watched, you've talked about the philosophy and longevity and the mental aspect and the emotional aspect. I think when we have these kind of booms and contractures, you are probably directly helping retain some of the people who come with those crests of the waves and aren't just lost because they're only exposed to that kind of extracting mentality. I think even if that's someone's initial entrance, the fact that they get exposed to folks like you is probably a good thing and increases the likelihood that they stick around and add to the community. So first, big thanks for that. Second, my question now, and probably my last question, I think, is what does the future look like now? Have you started to think about additional competitive aspirations, or have you shifted your mindset as a competitor and it's more about like the platform is a great place for me to see what I can do? Or is it like, yep, I'd like to see a pathway back to Worlds?
I would like to kind of explore some of the seriously competitive things again, provided that, I can do that and I'm capable. Omar, to kind of something you were hinting at as well, is as I was preparing for this competition, I'm only half joking when I would say that my goal is just to do better than I did at my last meet, because that last meet in 2016 was terrible, like I mentioned earlier. But so it was a very low bar to set, but it was serious. Like if I wasn't going to do at least that well, then maybe better to give it more time. But where to go from here? So incidentally, I'm moving this summer, so I'm going to wait until that settles. But when that settles, I'll pick another competition to do. And I do think that I want to get more serious about competing. And you're right, Eric, that my mentality has shifted a lot. And I feel like there's more to learn there. That, like, I've said this before too. I've got a bunch of pictures of me standing on second place podiums at world championships, just looking grumpy, and as a silver medalist at a world championship, you're the only person on earth that's upset about that. Everyone else looks at that and goes, that's freaking awesome. Good for you. Maybe bummer that it didn't go even more your way, but like, that's not a bad thing. Like, and to say, like, I think I even said it earlier, I lost or something like that. Like, well, you're still silver medalist at Worlds. Like, that, is that losing? Like, how are you framing this? I hope that I've grown a lot in how I view that, and I've been in a very fortunate position to guide other athletes who are also international competitors or competitors at whatever level, and hopefully I can impart some of that. That's like, look, man, if you find yourself in that position, smile for the camera. Like, this is not so bad, and you'll be glad that you did later. You'll be glad that you savor that memory while it's there, because next year it might not be. And if I'm fortunate and able to kind of explore that again, I hope to handle that better.
Beautifully said, Omar. What are we gonna do with that?
Bring him back on.
Yeah, I like it. Every meet, we're gonna have the post-meet Mike recap episode. I like it.
No, I love it. Mike gave the most existential, but that's the difference with Mike. You're basically, I don't know. So, do you play video games, Mike, or?
Not as much as I'd like. My kids play video games.
Okay. Do you know at all, like the Soulsborne, like the Dark Souls series at all?
Very little, yeah.
Okay. So I'll just say this. Mike is one of those characters, so it's very existential, leaning towards nihilism, Eric, like the whole world building and so forth. But there are certain characters that are comfortable. Yeah, but they're comfortable in it because it is the right assessment of the world, and then how do you move forward, and they still have a sense of like personal autonomy. And that is Mike T. He's in the cave and he's like, it's moving and it's dark and you have that flashlight, and then he just brought out a laser cannon and then he just shot a hole out of there. It's like, oh wait, there's the exit. There you guys go, right there. So no, man,
I just had to sit in the cave for 6 years. It was fine.
Yeah, and I was
made some cave drawings.
Yeah. Someone's gonna find them one day. But no, I love to hear that journey because it's something to either emulate or take a lot of tidbits from. And I can say where I am currently personally in my lifting journey, there's a high emotional resonance. And I think having that foresight, like you had even when it came to coaching, that these are questions that inevitably every single lifter will have, no matter how high they are in terms of their accomplishments. That there is no like linear journey of like, I'm the world champion. Like, even if you achieve the highest level 5 times, like these are questions fundamentally that one must address at some theoretical point in their lifting journey, or they become a painter or a venture capitalist, as Eric said.
Those are your options. 3. That's it. Yeah, I think this was a great conversation. I think it is an excellent companion to the last episode because it kind of gives us, we talked about it with a kind of almost a sociological lens, and now we talked about it with a personal lens for what does it mean to exist prior to that, during, and afterwards, and then with your own layered on top of the community changes, your own personal changes, which I think you eloquently said and accurately described there, Omar. Everyone deals with in one form or another for various different reasons and with different textures and flavors and colors. But I think a lot of people will be able to relate to this, which is why I'm really glad we did it. So Mike, if people are like, geez, I can't get enough of this guy, where can they find you?
Oh man, if you listen to me talk for over an hour and you can't get enough, huh?
It happens because I listen to the RTS podcast.
I guess Instagram is probably the place where we're most active, but we're going to be trying to get our YouTube going again. And you can find us on Mike Tuchscherer on Instagram or Reactive Training Systems, reactivetrainingsystems.com. We have a bunch of tools available on that kind of similar to the conversation that we're having, maybe a little less existential, but the goal there is always to help people make better training decisions.
Well, I'm waiting for the existential training program that auto-regulates based upon your current view of reality. We're not there yet. For now, there's emerging strategies, folks. But love it. Thank you so much for being on. It's a great conversation. I'm looking forward to this one coming out and the reception it gets. Omar, anything you want to add?
No, I just want to thank you, to echo what Eric said. I just want to thank you, Mike, because I do think to myself that there are certain voices in the community that can be so impactful. I think Eric is one of them. You're one of them. And that there is a finite amount. Like, there's not a replacement. People think, and I could definitely heavier with this in many different contexts, but it's like, oh, like, if this person wasn't taught, surely someone else would like arise or whatnot. It's like, no, there are certain people, events that could be very impactful. So I think it's just very necessary. And it is the perfect, as you said, Eric, bookend to that death of powerlifting, where that's what someone's like, what is the takeaway? I'm like, hey, just calm down. It's going to be okay. Let's bring on Mike Tuchscherer. He's going to sit you down. We're all in the cave. We're all in the cave together. And he's like, it's fine, right? It's dark. It's fine. And that's how you begin. So no, man, we'll make sure to link all everything you recommended down below, the social media, the website. So go ahead and check it out. I want to thank every single person. If you made it all the way to the end of this podcast, you are a dedicated Iron Cult listener. You're listening to the sizzling outro. You can go ahead and leave a rating and review. We have our own, Mike, existential battle, and that is in health and fitness. The Death of Powerlifting episode, I think we peaked at like 100 and something. We're ranking on the iTunes. The ratings and reviews help, so go ahead, leave a review. I was going to read a new one that just dropped. Totally forgot about it. It's okay. We'll do it next time. It helps out the algorithm. We are growing. The cult is expanding. Powerlifting is dying. The cult is expanding. Someone explain that to us. We're here now until the end of time, every single Monday. We'll catch you in that next episode.